Okay, good morning, and thank you for coming back. And thank you, Kelly, for taking some time out of your busy schedule to be with us today and to talk about boundaries. Most of you probably already know Kelly, so I don't really need to introduce her. She was settled here in, I'm assuming you were settled, Kelly, when she was commissioned as a diaconal minister, and I believe it was thousands of years ago, but not really. She was settled in Thessalon, and so Brian and Nancy know her well, and she's a lover of curling, as you've already heard. She's took her week off just to watch the I'm going to say Scotties, but I'm probably wrong about that.
Yeah.
So,
no, you're right.
I was right. I served a church where they, next to Jesus, there was curling. And,
You got that right.
and I think curling was above Jesus, actually. And they did their best to try and teach me to love curling. I did meet some guy named Brad Gushu at one particular point in my life, but I'm still kind of hoping for, I'm going to say McGarvel, I think is her name.
Yeah.
She's
Carvel.
Okay, I'm still rooting for her. Yes, okay.
Rob, sorry. You know that Jesus knew how to curl.
Oh, did he? And how do we know that? How do we know that?
He was a lead because he who is without sin shall cast the first stone.
Okay, so that's my introduction to Kelly. She's going to lead us through a conversation about, she has also served, she currently serves as our Office of Vocation Minister for the Canadian Shield Regional Council and for the Shining Waters Regional Council. But she has also served the first pastoral charge in Waterloo, in Grand River. She was there, and of course Thessalon. So welcome, Kelly, and thank you for being with us today. She does have to leave right at 11:45, so we will give her exactly 61 minutes.
And I'll just add, Rob, I was ordained in 2018.
2020.
2020, yes.
I did look that up, October 18th, 2020. So
I didn't know that. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So today, as we talk about boundaries, and I'm not leaving early for curling. It's actually because I have another boundaries training that starts at noon. So that's a longer one though than we're doing this morning. So this morning, I'm assuming that I know some of you have been doing pulpit supply for a long time and have been licensed lay worship leaders for a long time, and others are probably newer at it. But I'm assuming that you come with a certain amount of knowledge on boundaries. And so I have prepared some case studies for us to work through and navigate this morning. But I wanted to start by just popcorn. What do you think of when you think of boundaries? And you can
okay and not okay.
Okay and not okay. All right.
Borders, limitations.
Okay.
Professional relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Rules for our protection.
I think of boundaries that are regarding social media, financial boundaries, boundaries regarding worship, pastoral care, and that sort of thing. Different areas.
And Linda wrote in the chat, where you stop and I start. Well, I was thinking in preparing for this, in fact, what Linda put, where you stop and I start, I was thinking a workshop I took last weekend about a completely different topic, where the grace of space was talked about. And it is that space between where I stop and you start. And knowing how to navigate those areas of gray where it's not clear where I stop and you start. And so that's what we're going to look at today, where situations challenge the rules and where it's harder to make decisions on the fly. And so thinking about them ahead of time helps you stay grounded and know how to respond in any situation. Boundaries are about being clear what our role is in the situation, because we're going to see sometimes there's lots of issues, but what's ours to do and what's not ours to do is an important thing to be aware of, and then you can better respond to the situation. And sometimes we need to get outside perspectives and consult with colleagues. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to consult with one another. And boundaries often, they challenge us to consider how to best respect and protect ourselves, and how to respect and protect the other person or people in any situation. And sometimes it doesn't feel good because we want to respond in a way that's crossing a boundary, and so we want to be human and care for the other, but at the same time, we know what the rules are, as has been mentioned, but this is a situation that's challenging those rules, so what do we do? So I'm hoping by the end of this hour, we might have a list, and you can make them up yourself, or maybe somebody wants to record and create them for the group, of best practices and also possibilities of how to respond. So, Rob, I'm hoping you or maybe Joy can split us into small groups after I share the first case study.
We have George.
George, great.
How many groups do you want?
What I'd like is groups of 3 or 4.
Same groups as before is probably fine.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you 10 minutes. And I'm hoping Rob isn't in a group because I want to talk to him about something, but are you in a group?
I cannot go into the group. That's fine. Or something.
Okay.
George,
Would that leave a group of 2?
You and me.
Okay, so anyway, if we can, here's the first case study, and I'll paste it in the chat.
Okay.
Actually, I'll do that right now. So if you want to copy it and take it with you, you can. So you receive a call from a church that hasn't had a minister in over a year. They haven't had a Christmas Eve service in 3 years because of the pandemic. And they ask if you could do pulpit supply for all of Advent services and Christmas Eve, and they would really like communion. Yeah. Now, what are the boundary issues, questions, or concerns? What might be some best practices that you need to consider? And how might you best respond? And so we'll come back in 10 minutes time, and actually let's just make it right at 11. So I'll give you 8 minutes, and then we'll work it through together for 10 minutes before we do another one. So who wants to share first? What are the issues, questions, and concerns that your group discussed?
The issue, Kelly, is the ability of licensed lay worship leaders to do the sacraments. And then if you have, the solution was if you have a neighboring church where there's a minister willing to do communion, you can cover it that way. And then we just finished discussing the use of an agape meal rather than a full communion to cover the want or desire to have communion. And then it seems that in various places, licensed lay worship leaders are allowed to do a different number of churches in a row. Some we heard have 2. We for years here have always been able to do 3 services in a row. In our area, with Nance and I being in the same household, we often share, so one could do one service one day and the other the next day, kind of thing.
It was continuity that people were looking for, and in a rural area where you could be, for us, 50 miles from, at this point, an ordained or a minister who could do the sacraments, but also, and at the time, Algoma Presbytery approved, as I say, for continuity, where one licensed lay worship leader would be allowed to do all of the Advent services and Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. And so you've got a flow of the theme. The same thing for Advent. Now Lent, and Lent is a little longer, but that worked really well and was really appreciated in a few situations. I think it was only a couple churches that really happened, but Algoma Presbytery approved that adjustment to the boundaries, to the rules. And as Brian said, he could offer to these people that he and I share the services. And so there would be continuity for that series of services through, Advent, Christmas. But I mentioned that the agape meal, I did one over a year ago, and it was very meaningful. It was just simple juice and a cracker, and I set it out in little glasses and a cracker on a serviette. People came up single file, went back their place, and I just had the simple wording and a prayer, and it was very meaningful. But appreciated. But in a rural area, you don't want to wear yourselves out. Right now, we're really, really busy. We've bitten off more than we can chew. So you've got to respect that. And you just have to say to folks, I'm sorry, let's see if we can work out a compromise here and suggest other people, because we can't do it all. And
we're past presbyteries now. So
I know we are, but I'm saying when the worship leader committee is meeting, sometimes there needs to be compromise, especially.
What I'm going to say now, Nancy, is in my group with Susan. No, hang on a minute. With Susan and Janice in the same group, and we are all part of the LLWL resource team. I thought that we had talked about exactly what you were saying. And they said to me, no, we haven't, Joy. We've said, and it's written down, we've said 2 a month. Mm-hmm. And so we, I think, need to take it back to our group with that kind of a question now that we've heard it from this group. So we will do that. But it's the region's rules we have to stick with.
Oh, I respect that. I totally understand. Yeah, but I just wanted to throw it out there.
Sure.
Thank you. Faye has her hand up.
So a couple of things here. First of all, if it's a vacant pulpit for a long time, there should be a pastoral charge supervisor. And the pastoral charge supervisor should have some say about how communion happens. The other comment that was raised, and I think it's very valid, is that there's a desire for continuity, but there might need to be a little bit of responsibility in the local church for that continuity. And the licensed lay worship leader say, okay, have you got a theme for Advent? I'll fit into it, or something like that. Like we are in a 50% ministry situation with a student minister. Even then, our student minister, because 50% time, we are saying does the equivalent of 2 services or like half the services, and we want our minister to be doing other pastoral things during the rest of that time that are good for our church. So we have had to negotiate, okay, so when we have different lay preachers coming in, I'm one of them, but only one, how do we ensure continuity? And it's at the level of the worship committee sitting down well before the season and saying, here's our direction, and here are some of the key pieces that we'll have continuing through Advent or Lent. And then the preachers who come as supply preachers, they have that as a template, and they do their own thing for preaching and some prayers, but they fit into the continuity that we have established. And the last thing that came up in our group was the mention of sacraments elders and what the guidelines are or the restrictions. We know that they can only do the sacraments in their church, but it seems as if there are mixed practices about what churches can send a lay person to take the course. The other thing that came up was perhaps a resource that would be useful to people would be access to some sample agape service.
Thank you. Susan.
Hi, I was in a group with, with Joy and Cindy and Janice, and we kind of discussed that. Janice and I agreed that sometimes worship committees or churches approaching to ask LLWLs go way over on their request, saying, they ask for the moon, hoping that they'll get a couple of stars, like they start off with the big and hope to negotiate down. So yeah, we want somebody for all 4 Sundays of Advent and Christmas Eve. Maybe we'll get lucky, but expect that we'll only get them for a couple. Like they don't, they push the limits, the boundaries of hoping that they'll get more than they should, or that they really need, or something like that.
Thank you, Susan. Any other comments or points that you discussed that haven't been mentioned yet? Okay, I'm going to ask Rob if there's any pieces that you want to raise to our awareness that popped up for you that haven't been mentioned.
I think they've covered everything. Our policy states that you can only preach twice a month in the same pastoral charge. The second thing is, if they've been without a minister for 3 years, it's probably up to them to have determined who should be their sacraments elder, and that they should be trained. We happily do that, and they would then work with the worship committee as to when communion would be requested. So it would be in your best interest to say, no, I can only do 2 weeks, because otherwise you become it for people, that you become the minister, and all of a sudden you're not just doing 4 Sundays in a row, you're doing 12 Sundays in a row. And remember that there are other licensed lay worship leaders out there that can help carry you don't want to enable them to not ask themselves the hard questions, and perhaps raise someone up within. I know a church here in Thunder Bay, without a minister, they just started asking people to do their faith story, and that was a way of getting other people to do services and giving LLWLs breaks. So good job. I think you all figured all the rules out, and I hear that we like consistency, and but I think there are other ways to deal with consistency. So thank you.
Joy? Oh, you're muted, Joy.
Rob, I think we should bring back to our LLWL resource group the comment about when churches can ask for a sacraments elder, because we're supposed to have sacraments how many times a year? 4 times a year. And so if, like Marathon, we don't have any ministers between Thunder Bay and Sault Ste. Marie, that's asking a great deal of someone in one of those places, to a minister to come that far to do that. So we should bring it back up, whether that's a good length of time.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you who have helped raise what the complexity of issues are, especially in areas where there aren't ministers. And I'm hearing that clarity of role and what the rules even are need to be reviewed and clarified and shared even with folks that aren't here today. So, so thank you all for contributing to that. Second case study, I'm going to now post into the chat, and we'll follow the same process. So I'll read it out for you. You've just finished leading worship, and while talking to you on the way out of church, a man mentions that his wife has a couple of weeks to live at most. The church is getting a new minister in a couple of months, but he points out that that will be too late. He really liked the blessing you offered at the end of the service and mentions that. He then asks if you could visit his wife and offer her a blessing before she dies. He tells you his wife was the organist for 50 years and attended church every Sunday until she got sick. What are the boundary issues or questions or concerns? What are the best practices? And how might you respond? Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm curious to hear how this conversation went and what were the boundary issues or the questions or concerns, the best practices, and how might you respond?
Kelly, I was just about to read a statement on the worship leaders for the regional council. The question was asked whether we could do pastoral care. And there's the statement. Are licensed lay worship leaders expected to provide pastoral care? The answer is no. A licensed lay worship leader may not provide pastoral care in a pastoral charge that is not their own. It is expected that the licensed lay worship leader will refer any requests or requirements for pastoral care or counseling, home visitation, hospital visitation, to the called or appointed ministry personnel or the community of faith supervisor for follow-up. And then the question about a funeral, yes, well, worship leaders do lots of funerals. So. But that was a question where somebody thought we could do pastoral care, and that's not permissible.
No. It says not in your own, that's not your own. But you are allowed to do pastoral care in your own congregation.
So is that as a licensed lay worship leader, or is that as a
pastoral care worker,
a member of the church?
May not provide pastoral care in a pastoral charge that is not their own. Otherwise, you call the supervisor.
So you can do it in your own.
Okay.
But should it be from outside of your church family, you go to the supervisor of that congregation.
So I think that needs some clarification.
So that's the rule. What are the issues or questions or concerns, best practices? Is there anything else that came up in your conversation that you'd like to share?
Well, we said no, we couldn't as a worship leader, but this is saying we can now. So that's confusing.
Anyway, there's
John has
a
a
lot
lot
of
of points.
gray areas. That's the issue, is the number of gray areas and getting well known in the churches that you do go to, whether it's once a month or twice a month. It could be 24 times in a year, and guess what? You are part of that congregation.
And you know the person probably too.
Exactly.
Something that did come up was that, especially in small communities, we're known as, we're friends with people, but we're also maybe on a pastoral care team in the church or whatever. It's important for the person that we're visiting to know in what capacity we're there. Are we there as a friend and this is a friendly visit, or are we there, I'm coming on behalf of our church as a pastoral visitor this time or something? And boundaries as far as confidentiality are really important in those as well. The particular case study that we looked at, like the person said, oh, well, I really liked your blessing. You could say, well, I can give it to you on paper and you're welcome to take it, or, you know, talk to somebody here. But yeah, clearly you can't go and visit. That should be referred. And if the person's been there 50 years, there are going to be some other people there who would love to do that.
Yeah.
Kellie, I have a question that came up just a few moments ago. Is many of our pastoral charge supervisors are not ordered ministry. I'm pastoral charge supervisor for 2 communities of faith. Joy is pastoral charge supervisor for another. So what good is it for them to come to us in that sense? Because the same rules, I would think, apply whether we are licensed laity or just laity. Would we do that? What are the boundary issues there?
So the rule itself makes assumptions that don't always apply.
It would appear.
And I agree with George, because for years I supervised Manitowoc. Now he's in Marathon, supervising there, I believe.
Joy is.
And his point is legitimate.
No. I'm the pastoral charge supervisor in Manitowoc, and I would not go to visit by myself, but I would call one of the other people in that church who are part of the visitation team. I would offer to go with them if they wanted me to, but I would not take that role on as myself, whether I'm pastoral charge supervisor or not, whether I'm an LLWL or not. Like, I think that's something we need to do.
I was really surprised that the pastoral care supervisor has a role in that, because I haven't really seen that happening in my church. So I have to find out more about that.
The pastoral charge supervisor is acting as the minister in your church. So if they're asked, it's their responsibility to find a way to solve the mystery here. Not necessarily to do it, but to find a way to see that it's done.
One more response, Faye?
The pastoral charge supervisor, we have had a lay pastoral charge supervisor for the time that our pulpit was vacant, and also during the time that we have a student minister. And they have very specific job descriptions, including they're also part of the trustees. I don't know if people knew that or not, but they are the crisis go-to people. If, for example, when the student minister's away or something, they will find someone to connect. So they'll find a clergy to connect with the people in crisis by phone, even if not in person, when there's a distance involved.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Rob, any other comments before we move to our third case study?
No, I think you've covered everything. The only thing is to remind churches that they are responsible for their own pastoral care. And so most churches already have a pastoral care committee. And so if you receive a request at the end of a service it would be good to say to whoever, to know who's the pastoral care person and say, did you know that Bessie is on the way out and the family would like a visit? And it would be very clear that, and in Broadway's case, in Lori's case, I mean, if you're part of the pastoral care committee of your church, then you offer pastoral care. If you're not part of that, and as an LLW, you are not required, and I don't want to say allowed, because we all want to offer pastoral care. We don't want to be, I can't do that, so it sucks to be you. To offer a difficult time. I'm sorry, I can't provide that for you. So, anyways.
Okay, thank you. And Faye just posted that there is a big issue regarding pastoral care, funerals, etc., following the departure, retirement of ministers. And family calls the old minister. Yes, that's another issue, definitely. And that's the boundary issue that hopefully the clergy are taking the Retiring with Grace boundaries training that the Office of Vocation offers to help the clergy with their clear boundaries. I'm going to move on, though, to the next case study, the last case study, and maybe we can, I don't know, cut it to 6 minutes or something, George.
Yep.
So this one is another, well, I'll just read it out. During the worship service, the congregation is singing the hymn after the sermon. During the last verse, the organist collapses and bangs her head on the pew as she falls off the organ bench and onto the floor. What are the boundary issues, questions, concerns, best practices, and how you might best respond?
We're all back.
Well, welcome back. Who wants to share first this time?
I'll start.
Yes, Peter.
I think it's a very interesting scenario. I was attending church one time when somebody did collapse. However, in the back of the church, they were sitting near the back among the pews. But I think our role, is if we're doing the service at that time, is first thing to make sure that there's, who's ever going up there is a professional. And the other part is to make sure that the people in the pews who are still sitting there are upset, that we can calm their nerves so I think that's what our job is, and let the professionals do what they need to do, but reassure everybody that things are being taken care of, and that we all know that everyone wants to rush and help, but the best thing is to let the people who are trained to help out.
Yeah. In our group, Susan mentioned that someone from the church should call 911 because they know which door to go to. They know if there's a lift, they know the address, all of that. Not those of us who are visiting.
And we did have somebody wait at the door for the ambulance. So when the ambulance pulled up, they brought them in. The ambulance drivers were very professional. They didn't, have their sirens blasting outside the church, and they tried to do it as discreetly as possible as they could have, right?
Yeah, and you as the worship leader might need to, calmly ask, does someone have a cell phone to make a call right now? Like you might have to navigate that as the worship leader. Any other thoughts?
The one thing, if you're in a small church where you have training as a first aid responder, but nobody else does, so do you just sort of take over the situation and instruct somebody else to sort of keep the congregation calm?
So here's some common sense.
That's a good question. How do other folks feel? Any thoughts or ideas?
We talked about that in our group, and as a well, retired or not health professional, I keep my CPR certification current, and I have an obligation to provide that in a situation if there's
that's
no
where I
one
was
else.
sort of, which role do I take?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't characterize me doing CPR as my role as licensed lay worship leader, and be very sure that after the fact people were aware of that I am certified. But yeah, gosh, we have to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's always somebody in the congregation that, somebody that may be an elder in the congregation, or there's somebody there that their presence is calming and they can keep the other people calm while you're taking care of what has to be taken care of.
Bang on, Peter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Faye has a question.
Any other
Faye,
yes, Faye.
So I remember that in the last year, we had to do a bunch of policies and whatnot in our self-assessment through the region. And one of those policies is a safety policy. So on an ongoing basis, every congregation should have a safety policy that includes stuff on how you work with children, how you get out when there's a fire, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like who takes charge in the congregation when something like that happens. So that should be ongoing and in place. So there should be somebody in that congregation, a couple people who would know what to do.
Yes, thank you. Susan?
One thing that just came into my mind is, and I've just lost it. It's a cautionary tale for having your services written out, for having that, like that you don't talk off the top of your head, because if you do have to hand the duties over to someone else and you don't have anything written down, it's really hard for that flow to happen.
I don't know what that was. What did she say? Couldn't follow that at all.
Have things written down so that if you have to go, there's somebody to go over.
Yeah, it's important to consider, again, your role. And as some of you have said, if you have CPR training, emergency response training, then, what is your role? Well, maybe your role needs to shift. So then how do you pass the torch? Like those are, again, being clear what your role is. And it's not really very effective to try and do two roles in that situation.
No.
So it's thinking quickly on your feet, thinking who's coming. How is the medical team coming into the sanctuary? Is it wise to clear the sanctuary or leave everyone staying where they are? Does the service end? Do you continue it somewhere else? Like there's many things to navigate. And then who's offering pastoral care to the person that's just collapsed? And how is that being looked after? And although
and to the rest of the congregation too.
Exactly. Maybe you need to take the congregation downstairs and offer a prayer for the person that's just collapsed. And that's you still in worship leader mode. It is offering care for the congregation, but I don't think that would be crossing a boundary line. That's navigating the worship service that is before you. I'm curious if Rob has anything else to add.
No, I think they've handled it well. I think is to bring peace. Cindy's smiling because she knows that at one point when I was the minister at St. Paul's, I didn't even notice the person collapse until the ambulance drivers arrived. So I would say one of the key things is to notice what's going on in your congregation when someone keels over on that. Thankfully, it took her another 5 years before she died. And I think I did actually bury her, but that's a whole nother story. Thank you.
So thank you. That is the third and final case study. And I will tell you that last one actually happened to me one of the last times I did pulpit supply. So it can happen to anyone, anytime. And so it's important to think about how, yeah, you hold your role and you're clear about your role, you're clear about your responsibilities, and you do your best in any situation that becomes a little gray and murky.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I'll just add, although we don't have time to discuss this, really good self-care before and after leading worship. You know, make sure that you are looking after yourself, because that's how you will know where those boundary lines are.
Right. You must continue to fill your well in order to have water to share with others. And so that's important. That's why we have some rules about 2 Sundays a month, because we encourage you to worship at your own community of faith so that your well, your bucket is full. Yeah. But Kellie needs to go. So thank you, Kellie, so much for leading us in this conversation. And we wish you all the best and blessings on your ministry among us. So thank you.
Thank you.